The sky is black with arrows. Horses scream, men shout, steel crashes into steel so loud it drowns out prayer. The ground is churned into mud and blood and broken banners, and somewhere in the smoke, a rider cuts through the chaos like a blade through silk. She does not hesitate. She does not retreat. She lowers her spear and charges. Long black hair lashes loose from her helmet, armor slick with rain and sweat, eyes locked on her target. A mounted enemy breaks formation, thinking he's chasing a straggler. He is wrong. In seconds, he is on the ground, and she is already turning for the next kill. The men around her know her name. They shout it over the clash of weapons, over the thunder of hooves, over the sound of their own fear. Tomoe. Not my lady, not the woman, just Tomoe, the warrior who rides where the fighting is thickest and does not come back empty-handed. This is the Genpei War, late 12th century Japan. Clan against clan, brother against brother, a country tearing itself apart over who gets to rule. And in the middle of it, not in the camps, not behind screens, not waiting to be protected, rides a woman history will never quite know what to do with. They will call her beautiful. They will call her brave. They will call her terrifying. What they will not call her is accidental. Because Tomoe Gozen is not a rumor. She is not a mascot. She is not there to inspire men. She is there to win. And that is what makes her dangerous. Myth, monster, or the greatest samurai of them all. But before the battlefield, before the war cries and the severed heads and the legends written by men who could not ignore her, Tomoe is just a girl growing up in a world that does not expect girls to carry swords. Japan in the late 1100s is not gentle. Power belongs to clans, not crowns. Loyalty is inherited. Violence is routine. If you are born into a warrior household, your future is already decided. You will train, you will fight, you will bleed for your lord. Tomoe grows up in that world, and she is trained in it. She learns to ride as if the horse is part of her own body. She learns archery, spear work, sword technique. She learns battlefield discipline, not performance, not ceremony, but survival. She learns how to read terrain, how to anticipate an opponent's movement, how to strike without hesitation. This is not common. This is not encouraged. But it happens anyway. Because some girls are raised to obey, and some are raised to fight. And Tomoe does not grow into her skills quietly. People notice. They notice the girl who rides faster than the boys, the girl who does not flinch in sparring, the girl who keeps winning. And eventually, she is sent into service under a rising warlord whose fate will become inseparable from her own. Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a rebel, a strategist, a man willing to use every capable fighter he can get, including her. He does not place her in the background. He places her at the front. He trusts her with troops, with critical charges, with missions that decide battles. And on campaign after campaign, Tomoe proves something that makes people deeply uncomfortable. She is not exceptional for a woman. She is exceptional, period. And in a culture built on martial honor, reputation is everything. Which means Tomoe's name starts traveling faster than she does. From campfires, from war stories, from the mouths of men who survived because she did not hesitate. By the time the war turns brutal, and it will, Tomoe is no longer just a soldier. She is a presence, a problem for the enemy, a symbol for her allies. And soon, she will be standing beside a man whose ambition will put them both directly in the path of betrayal. Because war does not only kill with swords, sometimes it kills with politics. Loyalty is dangerous when power starts to shift. At first, everything goes right. Yoshinaka's forces surge through central Japan, cutting through rival clans with speed and brutal efficiency. Cities fall, strongholds collapse, messengers ride hard with news that shocks the capital. The Minamoto clan is winning, and Yoshinaka is at the front of it. And everywhere his banner goes, Tomoe rides with him, not behind, not protected, but leading charges, breaking lines, holding ground when others fall back. Chroniclers will later describe her as worth 1,000 warriors. That isn't poetry. That is battlefield math. Yoshinaka knows exactly what he has. He trusts her not just with fighting, but with command. He puts troops under her authority. He sends her where hesitation means death, and she delivers, again and again, until her reputation becomes inseparable from his success. But success has a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. Because while Yoshinaka is winning battles, the rest of the Minamoto family is watching, and they are not celebrating, they are calculating. In clan warfare, victory is never just about defeating the enemy. It is about who gets credit for the victory afterward, who controls the capital, who writes the peace. And Yoshinaka, bold and popular and unpredictable, is starting to look less like a useful cousin and more like a rival. So while he fights in the provinces, politics in the capital begin to turn against him. Orders arrive, then conflicting orders, then whispers that his loyalty is being questioned. Yoshinaka, a battlefield general through and through, does what many warriors do when politics start closing in. He ignores it. He believes his victories will protect him. Tomoe, however, is not blind. She sees how supply lines thin, how reinforcements stop arriving, how allies begin hesitating when his name is mentioned. She knows what that means. Not defeat yet, but isolation. And isolation on a battlefield is a death sentence waiting for the right moment. That moment comes fast. The Minamoto leadership sends their own armies, not against the enemy, but against Yoshinaka himself. Officially, it is framed as restoring order. In reality, it is a purge. Two massive forces converge, and suddenly Yoshinaka's victories mean nothing. He is outnumbered, cut off, and trapped between rival clans that now agree on exactly one thing. He has to go. And Tomoe is still at his side when it happens. When the camp realizes they are being surrounded. When scouts report enemy banners approaching from multiple directions. When it becomes clear this is not a skirmish, this is an execution. Yoshinaka prepares for a last stand. And here is where the legend sharpens into something strange and painful. Because according to later accounts, as the final battle approaches, Yoshinaka turns to Tomoe and gives her an order, not to fight, to leave. He tells her to escape, to survive, to not die with him.
Some stories say he did not want to die beside a woman. Others say he wanted her spared the dishonor of defeat. Some suggest he feared her capture more than his own death. We don't know his exact words. What we know is that Tomoe does not want to go. She has ridden beside him through fire and blood. She has commanded his men. She has helped build his victories with her own hands. And now, when everything collapses, he tells her to disappear. It is the most dangerous kind of loyalty test. Stay and die. Leave and live with the story people will tell afterward, because history loves clean endings, and Tomoe's story is about to get anything but clean. The last stand, the severed head, and the warrior who refused to fade. The final battle does not happen on a grand open field. It happens in winter, cold mud, frozen reeds, horses slipping on ground already chewed up by boots and blood. Yoshinaka's army is exhausted, outnumbered, surrounded by forces that once fought under the same clan banner. Civil war has a special kind of cruelty. No mercy, no clean enemy lines, just brothers cutting down brothers while the empire watches. And Tomoe is still there. Despite the order to leave, despite the certainty of defeat, she mounts her horse, ties her armor tight, and rides into what everyone knows is the end. This is not desperation, this is decision. Accounts from the time describe her charging into the enemy ranks like a blade thrown by the gods themselves. She cuts through mounted warriors, she breaks spear lines, she rides straight at enemy commanders, not foot soldiers, not distractions, but targets that matter. One chronicler writes that she seized a powerful warrior by the helmet, tore him from his horse, and cut off his head before anyone could stop her. Not in rage, in control. She is not fighting to survive, she is fighting to finish what the battle no longer can. And then the moment comes that legends are built from. Yoshinaka's horse becomes stuck in the marsh.
Arrows fall, his guards drop around him. The cousin he trusted least finally catches him. And just like that, the man who almost took the capital is dead. The war moves on without him. But Tomoe does not vanish quietly into the background of that moment. Some versions say she returned to Yoshinaka's body and took his head herself. Not to display it, but to deny it to his enemies. Because in samurai warfare, your head was not just proof of death, it was proof of victory. And Tomoe was not about to let them have that. Other accounts say she took one final enemy head instead, so that if this was to be her last act, it would be written in blood, not retreat. Historians argue about which version is true, but they agree on one thing: she did not die there. She left the battlefield alive. And that is where things get strange, because warrior epics are built on deaths, not on women who survive.
After Yoshinaka falls, the official records begin to thin. And that silence is not accidental. Victors write history, and victorious clans had no interest in preserving the reputation of a woman who fought better than most of their generals. So what happens to Tomoe Gozen after the war? This is where fact turns into fog. Some traditions say she was captured and forced into marriage by an enemy warrior, turned from battlefield terror into a domestic trophy. Others say she became a nun, retreating into religious life, her sword traded for prayer beads. And some say she disappeared completely, refusing to become a footnote in anyone else's victory story. Each version tells us more about the society telling it than about Tomoe herself, because every ending tries to soften her. Wife, nun, ghost, anything but warrior, anything but threat. But think about what those stories are really doing. They are trying to put her back where women were supposed to belong after war was over. Quiet, contained, no longer dangerous. And yet, her name survives when most men from that war do not. She appears in songs, in paintings, in later samurai manuals as proof that skill does not belong to gender. Even the men who tried to erase her couldn't quite manage it. Because battles end, but reputations linger. And Tomoe's lingered like a challenge. The woman who broke the script, and why history never forgave her for it. Tomoe Gozen did not die beautifully on a battlefield. She did not sacrifice herself so that poets could seal her story with tragedy and honor. She lived. And for medieval war narratives, that was inconvenient. Because war stories are built on clean endings. Heroes fall. Loyal retainers die beside them. Defeat feels meaningful. But Tomoe slipped out of that structure. She did not stay to be claimed by victory or defeat. She left. And that survival is exactly why the stories start trying to tame her afterward. If she had died, she could have been safely mythologized. Instead, she became something harder to categorize. A woman who chose her own ending. And societies are never comfortable with that. So what does history do when it doesn't know where to put someone? It reshapes them. Later versions of Tomoe's life turn her into a wife, or a nun, or a wandering ghost who vanishes into forests and mountains. Each version removes the thing that made her dangerous. Agency. A sword in her hand becomes prayer beads. Command becomes obedience. Warrior becomes symbol. Not because these endings are proven, but because they are more acceptable. They restore order. They put the woman back into a shape society understands. And yet, even while trying to soften her, the stories can't help but keep her power intact. She's still described as impossibly strong, still praised for her courage, still remembered for cutting down men who underestimated her. So you get this strange contradiction. They celebrate her skill, but refuse to let her own it. She becomes extraordinary but not autonomous, admired but never allowed to be comfortable. Because Tomoe Gozen represents something deeply unsettling to rigid hierarchies, proof that ability does not care about rules. And once people have seen that, they cannot unsee it. What makes this even more striking is that Tomoe was not a lone anomaly. Women did fight in Japan's medieval wars. Not commonly, not officially, but enough that the culture had words for them. Onna bugeisha,
Women trained in martial combat, especially for defending estates when men were away. But Tomoe was different. She didn't defend, she attacked. She rode into open warfare. She sought commanders, not intruders. That leap, from protector to aggressor, is what made her legendary. And threatening, because defensive women can be explained as desperate. Offensive women look intentional. And here's the uncomfortable truth most heroic epics avoid. Tomoe was not just brave, she was politically useful. Yoshinaka's cause gained legitimacy by showing that even women were willing to fight for it. Her presence made his rebellion feel righteous, desperate, and morally urgent. Which means Tomoe was not just a sword, she was propaganda, a symbol. And symbols are always controlled after the fact, because whoever owns the story controls the lesson. So what lesson did history try to teach with Tomoe? Not, women can command armies, but even exceptional women eventually return to their proper place. Which is why the endings always push her toward domesticity or religious withdrawal. They are moral corrections disguised as biographies. And Tomoe herself? She remains stubbornly unreachable behind them. Because the only fully verified facts we have are these. She fought, she commanded, she survived. Everything after that is guesswork shaped by cultural discomfort. And that brings us to the most fascinating part of her legacy. Tomoe Gozen did not just survive the war, she survived the story. 9 centuries later, she is still remembered not as someone's wife, not as someone's servant, not as someone's daughter, but as a warrior in her own right. Which is astonishing in a tradition that names thousands of men and almost no women. She wasn't erased, she was contained. And containment is not the same as disappearance. But here's the twist. Tomoe's story doesn't just tell us about medieval Japan. It tells us something about power that still feels very modern. When women enter spaces built by men, especially violent ones, they are either demonized or domesticated afterward, rarely respected on their own terms. And that pattern? It repeats across centuries, across cultures, across empires. Which is exactly why Tomoe fits so perfectly into your dark heroine's universe. She isn't just a warrior, she's a prototype.
Why Tomoe chose the sword, and what that choice cost her.
Tomoe Gozen did not pick up a sword because it was romantic. She picked it up because in the world she lived in, obedience was not safety, it was erasure. By the late 1100s, Japan was sliding into a new order where warrior clans, not court nobles, would decide the future. Status was no longer secured by poetry or pedigree, but by how well you could hold ground when everything collapsed into violence. And Tomoe understood something early. If you were going to be trapped inside someone else's war, you could either be protected or you could be powerful. Protection is temporary, power gives you choices. Tomoe's loyalty to Minamoto no Yoshinaka wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. He was a rebel within a rebellion, an outsider even among his own clan. His forces were smaller, his enemies more numerous, his position always unstable, which meant every fighter mattered. And in unstable systems, talent rises fast. Tomoe wasn't tolerated because she was a novelty, she was relied upon because she delivered results. Victory makes people flexible about tradition. But choosing the sword did something else too. It removed her from the narrow futures available to women of her time. Marriage, household, quiet endurance. Those paths were not gentle, they were just invisible. Tomoe's life would be dangerous either way. She chose the danger where she could at least move. And make no mistake, the battlefield was not equality. She fought among men who would have no hesitation killing her if she were on the other side. Armor didn't erase her gender. Strength didn't protect her from contempt. Reputation didn't cancel out threat. Every victory had to be earned again and again. Because respect for women in violent systems is always conditional. So what kept her there? Not glory. Survival with dignity. And something else too, quieter but sharper. Autonomy. Tomoe was not fighting for empire. She was fighting for command over her own story. and that is far more dangerous to rigid hierarchies than any army. But autonomy has consequences. When Yoshinaka fell, Tomoe's protection vanished with him. There was no victorious faction waiting to reward her, no retirement package for women who made themselves useful in wartime. The very skills that kept her alive now made her inconvenient, because peace does not know what to do with women who learned to thrive in war. And this is where the cost of her choices becomes painfully clear. We don't know what became of her not because she wasn't important, but because societies are excellent at forgetting women once their usefulness ends, especially women who never learned to behave quietly. She did not found a dynasty. She did not become a court legend. She did not leave children who carried her name forward. She left only stories, and stories are easy to reshape.
So later generations turned her into safer shapes.
A wife, a nun, a ghost wandering hills in sorrow, endings that tell women even the fiercest eventually return to softness, even the boldest must surrender to stillness. But none of those endings are proven. They are emotional closures written by people who needed them to exist. What we do know is this: Tomoe Gozen chose a life that broke every expectation placed on her. She stepped into a role no law had prepared for. She commanded, fought, and survived a civil war that reshaped Japan. And then, when the story no longer served her, she vanished from the official record. Not because she failed, but because she refused to be owned by anyone else's narrative. And that leads us to the final question her story leaves hanging. Did Tomoe fade into anonymity, or did she simply step into a life where no one could order her again? Because sometimes the greatest rebellion is not dying gloriously. It's living quietly on your own terms. What history does to women, it can't control. Tomoe Gozen survives in history the way wildfire scars survive in forests. You can see where something powerful once burned, but the people who wrote the records moved on before they bothered to ask what grew back. And that tells you almost everything you need to know about how history treats women like her. Men who fight wars become founders. Women who fight wars become anomalies, curiosities, footnotes, legends half buried in poetry and rumor. Because a woman who chooses the sword doesn't fit the tidy categories history prefers. She isn't a victim. She isn't a wife. She isn't a martyr. She's just inconvenient. And inconvenient women rarely get monuments. So what do historians do with someone like Tomoe? They romanticize her. They soften her. They domesticate her. They turn her into a tragic lover, a repentant nun, a ghost who wanders fields waiting for forgiveness. Because that ending feels safer. Because it turns her power into something temporary, something that had to be surrendered in the end. But the version of Tomoe we meet on the battlefield? She isn't asking permission. She isn't apologizing. She isn't begging history to explain her. She's acting. And action is dangerous for systems built on hierarchy. Here's the uncomfortable truth hiding inside her legend. Tomoe Gozen did not wait for the world to make room for her. She took space in a structure that was never designed to hold her. And when that structure shifted, she didn't cling to it for validation. She left. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Not every powerful woman ends in tragedy. Some simply refuse to stay visible once visibility becomes another kind of cage. Some choose lives that don't generate legends. And that doesn't make them smaller. It makes them free. So when people ask, was Tomoe real or just a myth? They're missing the point.
Because even if every detail of her story were perfectly documented, the real question would still be the same. Why does it feel so strange to believe a woman could be this capable without needing punishment at the end? Why do we expect defiant women to be broken by their own stories? Tomoe Gozen reminds us of something that history still struggles to accept. Power doesn't always want a throne. Sometimes it just wants the right to choose, where to stand, who to follow, when to walk away. And that is why her story refuses to die. Not because she was the best warrior, not because she was beautiful, not because she was rare, but because she represents a kind of freedom that societies keep pretending doesn't exist.
A woman who does not ask what she is allowed to be, and simply becomes. So when the chronicles fall silent, when the battlefield clears, when the war moves on without her name, don't imagine her disappearing. Imagine her stepping into a life no one else gets to narrate. Because some legends don't end in glory. They end in choice. And that might be the most radical ending of all.
And that's where we leave her. On the page, in the archive, in the rumor, in the shadow she carved into history. Maybe she was a villain. Maybe she was a victim. Maybe she was something far more dangerous. A woman who refused the role she was handed. But one thing is certain. The world wasn't ready for her then, and it still isn't now. If you enjoyed falling down this rabbit hole of power, defiance, and the women history tried to bury, make sure you're here for the next chapter, because there are more of them, more rebels, more survivors, more legends disguised as scandals. Until next time, keep questioning the stories you were told, and keep an eye on the women they warned you about.